Hi, my name is Nikki Blomstrand, and I will be presenting on my STEM resource from this past unit. All right, so my introduction is going to be talking about how STEM as a discipline, one of the inherent values of it is integrating the four individual disciplines. So, science, technology, engineering, and math, which I will have more information on each of those as we go. But in addition to focusing on their strengths as individual subject matter, the new driving force in the STEM curriculum area is integrating those concepts together, as we've seen in our readings and our research as well from this week. There's really a significant power and effectiveness in integrating those four disciplines together in any way that we can in order to reinforce concepts in individual subjects, in order to drive student interest, in order to increase the real world applicability, and to mimic more what these topics would look like in terms of a real world application. We know that most things don't happen in a vacuum within the real world. So while it's great to really focus and hone in on an individual, skill or topic related to one of the four disciplines, very likely when you go and try to think about it in terms of its real world application, it's a multifaceted situation. So, for example, something such as plants, when we look at plants in terms of science, you can learn about the life cycle, you can learn about the different kinds of plants, the varieties, the climates, but as soon as you start really getting into it, you're going to automatically find yourself having conversations about, the technology and how that has impacted our ability. You talk about greenhouses, you talk about watering systems, you talk about or irrigation systems, you talk about things that can manipulate the climate or things that impact the climate. You talk about, figuring out how successful you can be at growing plants, and that would bring you into quantities, which ties in math. You can engineer and design something that can better improve your ability to grow plants. And so, given all of those, plants is a very easy and common a very common example of how very quickly this one individual topic in a given discipline can really be magnified and reinforced, and you can learn so much more and gain a better understanding once you start discussing the other three disciplines and how they impact the topic as well. All right, so starting off with science. Science, I think, is, in a way while math is probably the most consistently taught, science gets probably the most consistent shine. Science is seen as, for most people, as exciting and it's certainly daunting as well. But what I think I love about science and education, and especially throughout this process of this taking this course, what we've thought about is really about how the importance of the inquiry and the process of the science is just as important as the subject matter itself, right? So the topics are within the umbrella of science, and learning about the natural world and all of the components that have to do with it, but also learning about the process and the inquiry and just feeding that natural curiosity. Science really lends to all of that, and it's seen as exciting, right? So it's something that can really, if we do it in a thoughtful way, can really engage our students and make them excited to be learners in the situation. And so and science really is everywhere. So it's such a great opportunity to not feel like kids are sitting in a classroom being forced to learn something and just for the sake of learning it, but it's a really easy way it's a really great subject to say, hey, this is why you're learning it. This is where it's going to apply to your life. This is how it will impact you. This is what's going on in the world, and this has to do with that, and knowledge is power. So it's a great way to engage learners, and it also can be tailored to any level, any age level. So I think when you really think about science, you tend to, personally, I should say, maybe not everybody, but I think that, we can sometimes automatically start thinking those middle school, high schoolers, even college level science topics. But it's also really exciting and fun for young learners. It can be as simple as doing, do objects sink or float, doing, cars down a ramp. It can be doing pulley systems. It can be growing a plant in for a life science activity. And then, obviously we can get into some really, really interesting and exciting and kind of higher level thinking as well within those same subjects, and some extended subjects, in terms of plants to connect it to a greater or a higher level opportunity for science learning. You can talk about the environment, right? So we can start talking about how climate or weather impact it. You can start talking about, and the environment and the impact of the human presence on the environment, on plants, and on natural resources is such a important topic within the world right now. So when you get into those higher level courses, you can take something as simple as learning about plants, and you can really scale the learning and the complexity of the topic to apply to things that are going to impact these students out in the real world. And also, I just think that science is arguably the biggest connector of all of the STEM disciplines, right? So science, again, I'll say it truly is everywhere, and it is so naturally applicable to technology, engineering, and math. The way our world has developed, there are so many things that the curiosity of science and the natural world, and just trying to understand more and learn more about the process and the things around us, whether it be nature, whether it be the human body, whether it be medicine, all of these things that as humans we're curious about and we want to learn more about. And then what we have done is, based on those curiosities, we've used technology to accelerate that learning. We bring in engineering to design and build these things that can aid in the learning or be, a solution to a problem that we were trying to solve. And then math is really just a driving force of, not only understanding concept, but analyzing the data surrounding it and like the effectiveness of it. So science really, for me, is the one that starts is where those cross-cutting concepts and that integration really can start. Moving on to technology. Technology is probably the most rapidly growing sector of STEM. It is really, truly amazing. I think that I had done my presentation a couple weeks back on heredity, and I talked about in that presentation how amazed I was with, even within a topic that I had felt like I had really good background knowledge on and that I had kept up with somewhat for personal and professional reasons. I still was amazed by how far technology has come and how many advancements have been made in the field. And that can be said across so many fields within science. Technology is really just, or across STEM, aiding in, it's popping up everywhere, right? We see it in our schools, and it creates so many opportunities, and it also creates some challenges. We really have these kids now that are what was referred to as digital natives, and they are exposed to technology at such a young age, and it's really powerful in a lot of ways. It makes them very proficient in it. It makes them very skilled at it. It opens up a world of opportunity between, having access to information, being able to be literate at research, being able to connect with other people, being able to have experiences and access to other people's experiences that without technology they wouldn't be able to, right? Video calling, even watching YouTubes, having access to social media, instantaneous access to people that are all over the world, and being able to share their firsthand experiences. It can be so powerful when it's used in the right way. And on the reverse side, we also have to be careful because it can also be consuming, and we don't want it to replace kids' connection to other humans. We don't want it to replace students' understanding of concepts. Why do I need to know that? I can just look it up, right? If you have any kids, I have 4th, 5th graders. I hear that all the time. I'm not going to be able to do this. I'll just be able to look it up. I'll have my phone. I'll have my iPad. So it certainly creates its own set of challenges, and because one of the scary parts of technology is being able to control it. So if you intentionally use technology, it can be incredibly beneficial. But if you aren't intentional about it, or you don't put enough parameters around it, especially in terms of students and children and adolescents, it can also become dangerous because they can have access to all the things you want them to, but they can also have access to things that you don't necessarily want them to have access to. So, but it is also the other thing about technology that I think is really fabulous is technology is an opportunity to make subjects more challenging and more complex. And so, especially for our learners that are exceptional learners, that's really great because if you have kids that are high level learners and they're advanced students, technology can be a way to challenge and engage them within the subject that you're already teaching to the rest of the class. And I think that's really a great use, of technology within the STEM concepts. And on the other side, it can be a really, really powerful way to, assistive technology has come such a long way. It can include our learners that have disabilities or might have deficits in areas to make it so they can still meaningfully engage in the same subject matter as their peers. And finally, technology is another way that, much like science, and all of these will have their strength in connecting them together, but technology is truly a universal way to connect not only to the other disciplines within STEM, but honestly, broader educational subjects as well. So under my resources, I put two things that I use in my classroom, which are Centervention and Inspiration Maps. And while they're not for science, engineering, or math, I actually incorporated them because they do have STEM components, but their primary use is technology. So within Centervention, it's actually an SEL program. And so the kids go on, they play Centerventions. It's basically a game that walks them through different scenarios, and it gives them the opportunity to it's a choose your own adventure. How would you respond to this? What would you do next? And they can make these choices. And then they also receive feedback from the program on how that may have impacted it or how it would have played out. And then behind the scenes, what it does is it calculates all these answers, and it compiles all the data on the decision making, the tendencies of the kids, what each child's profile leans towards in terms of some different SEL metrics. And then it compiles all of that for the admins, which in this case in my school is myself as their case manager and their social worker or school psychologist, depending on the child, to have that access to, which incorporates your math right there. And it's a very cool way that technology and mathematics, two of our components of STEM, actually go beyond just the STEM use. So it's pretty cool with that. And then same thing with Inspiration Maps. Inspiration Maps I put on there as well. It's a graphic organizer generating tool. It's phenomenal for my kids because, especially for my kids with some tougher times with handwritten work and executive functioning and organizational skills, what it does is it's able to make these when they're planning writing projects, but also for some of our science experiments when we are trying to brainstorm ideas about a subject and design an experiment or design a writing project. I find a lot of my kids have sometimes too many ideas and they have a hard time kind of making sense of them all. So this not only allows them to make a visual map using technology and eliminating some of the things like handwriting and just like endurance for writing that would normally be a barrier for them, but then also it can take the visual map that you create and then in just a click of a button turn it into an organized, typed out graphic organizer, which again I just find really helpful both in writing and in science. We even use it sometimes when we're brainstorming things that we're going to write in our science notebooks. So technology is just truly the way that it has developed. It's changing so fast, and it's a very, very powerful tool, and it also has a very powerful way to connect the four disciplines together, which we know is the goal of the STEM curriculum, or the goal that STEM curriculum is heading towards. All right, so engineering. Engineering is the newbie to the field. Engineering is a very rapidly growing industry, and to the point even where in my research I found one from 2016 that I ended up using and citing, and then also a more recent one as well. But our government is putting out, information and also some guidance and guidelines on incorporating engineering into our curriculum because it really wants to emphasize how important it is to be competitive globally with other countries. It is this field that is in kind of hand in hand with technology. It's really the careers are exploding. The need for it in so many different industries is exploding. It is something that if we don't kind of get on board with, we're gonna fall behind rapidly. But there's so much opportunity for students to have really meaningful careers following their secondary education. And so it's something that our government and our educational curriculum is really trying to emphasize and grow the understanding of, because, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it wasn't even barely on anyone's radar. And now it's something that, people are really, really striving to be. And it gives kids an opportunity to have a really meaningful career beyond their schooling and their education. So it's being emphasized within the STEM curriculum because of its relevance. And so, something I found interesting was that STEM workers really only account for about 6% of the US workforce, but yet they're considered essential to economic growth, innovation, and global competitiveness. So, because of this growing demand, it's really become clear that we need to be not only adding this into our curriculum, but earlier than we ever thought. When you think of engineering, you don't think of young children, but the reality is that some of the basis of the key points of engineering, especially the design process and the creation of tools and technology, that all can start really young. Going back to the previous slides, we had mentioned like ramps and cars going down. Similar, an engineering experiment that we do in my classes of making balloon powered cars, and these things all can start at such a young age, and they're a great way to practice those basic engineering skills, those foundational engineering skills of creating and designing something and troubleshooting what works better, what doesn't work, and seeing where those skills can grow to. And as you go up, there's endless opportunities, but something that's pretty common nowadays and is robotics labs. And I shouldn't say pretty common, and it's something that is available though, and not only robotics labs, but robotics teams, robotics competitions, and those students that are exposed to that and have those opportunities really have this leg up in their early, we'll call them careers of engineering. And it's so anyone that has that ability to participate in those is really making themselves competitive and also a very desirable candidate, especially for some collegiate programs. So, and something to keep in mind with that, which I think is important, is that, for the previous slide as well, that technology and engineering can be fields within science that face barriers. Technology costs money. Engineering, things like robotics labs and even supporting robotics teams and engineering clubs and things like that, a lot of that requires money and materials and funding. And so it's definitely something that can be a privilege at this point, especially because it's new and it's not automatically, math is going to be inherently part of our curriculum, regardless of where you go to school, what, financial, what the finances of your school looks like, what school budgets look like. And so engineering and technology, when you're planning for these things and when you are considering students, you really do have to try to consider that they will be impacted by the accessibility to the tools and programs that it takes to really incorporate these into your curriculum. So again, definitely just another way that you have to be not only mindful, but you might have to be creative and think outside the box if you do not readily have access to some of the more higher level equipment that some students and some school programs do. All right, and finally, we have mathematics. So math has been around for forever, and it's always going to be, and it's really what I like to call the great connector. So math can be tied pretty seamlessly into science, technology, and engineering, if not is inherently present in all of them, to be quite frank. So when you think about any sort of science experiment, when you think of technology, when you think of the engineering and design process, math is going to be part of that, whether it's, collecting data, whether it's graphing or analyzing data, whether it's using your problem solving skills that you first learn in your early math concepts. You talk about patterns. We'll talk a little bit more about that and the cross-cutting concepts, but and then cause and effect. All of these are things that are taught as, like, whether they're taught explicitly or implicitly within math curriculums from a really early age. So math is almost the, like, that essential connector of the four disciplines. And while math is so powerful to push the other three disciplines forward, it's also really important to note that the other three are a great way to enforce those math concepts that are so essential. So it's just another way to not only practice the skills, but it gives more context to them. So by learning about math, not only just as learning the function of the equations and the arithmetic in isolation, but also learning about the math in the context of real world problems and carrying out experiments and analyzing, things that students would be curious about. It gives students another way to not only have the skill reinforced, but have it really be an engaging and an impactful way for them to learn it, making it more likely that they're going to retain it. And it also, by providing that context of the science, technology, and engineering that it's involved in, it makes it more likely that it's going to that they're going to understand the concept, and that it's going to be able to be one that sticks with them and follows them, and they're able to apply going forward in both their educational and outside lives. I'd be remiss if we went through STEM without talking about our cross-cutting concepts. The Next Generation Science Standards, one of the key components of it, excuse me, sorry, I've been fighting that this whole time, is the cross-cutting, or are the cross-cutting concepts. Like we have seen at every juncture of this course, that the integration of the four disciplines is really that driving force behind the current STEM curriculums that we see in education and what the current ideology is. The research hasn't and literature haven't quite caught up yet. But right now, in the present educational landscape, integrating those four is really important, and we see what we believe the benefits are and what they can be. And so these cross-cutting concepts, the 7 of them, are ways to really drive home that connection, and ways to have the 4 disciplines really interact with each other and reinforce student engagement, student interest, student learning, and student understanding. So, I call them the interdisciplinary bridges that support the fusion of the STEM subjects, and that is really true. They build that bridge, right? So, you have patterns, cause and effect, scale, proportion, and quantity, system and system models, energy and matter, structure and function, stability and change. Those are your 7 cross-cutting concepts. And there's, I don't want to say infinite, but there are what feels like endless ways to use those to bridge our 4 disciplines together and make us more. And if we're able to do that as educators, we're going to be more effective educators, and our students are going to be more effective members of society as they go out and they take what they've learned in our classrooms and use them in their communities. So the cross-cutting concepts are something that are really essential to focus on when planning our STEM curriculums. And finally, I talked about it a little bit prior, but STEM within special education is something that is really a great opportunity to include students of all abilities. So whether you have exceptional learners that are going to require more challenges, instead of just giving them more work to do, within the STEM field, there are so many ways, especially thank you to technology. We are able to not just give them more work to do, but give them more meaningful work to do. So, you can design your curriculum so that a student that needs to be challenged more doesn't just have to, answer extra questions or do something more than once. But if you change, if you were to have like an experiment that you're doing, instead of putting that child maybe in a group, you might have them work with another partner of a similar skill level, or even do it individually and add a layered component in there, whether it be a deeper analysis or incorporating a program or an application that maybe the other students aren't ready to use yet, or using the science or the scientific process or the engineering process to challenge their thinking a little bit more. Instead of giving the same prescriptive experiment that you might give the rest of the class, you might have them be more part of the design process of the experiment, or give them more variables to work with within their experiment to challenge and really meet their heightened need for academic material. On the other end, you also can, like I said earlier, bridge the gap between learners who have disabilities or deficits. Assistive technology is a phenomenal thing, whether it be, using speech to text or text to speech applications. If students have readings and deficits in reading or writing, that could be bridged with using those applications, so that, for example, something that's very common in K through 12 STEM curriculums is a science notebook, right? If we have friends that are aversive to handwriting or don't quite have the stamina for handwriting, or maybe they have, fine motor deficits where they don't have legible handwriting, if you allow them access, or if they're able to have access to tech or speech to text, then they can still, if they have that knowledge and that conceptual understanding, they can still present it and compile it in a way that other students can read and participate with and interact with, and they can still complete the assignment without having their disability act as a barrier to it. And that's just one example. There are so many ways within the STEM curriculum that we can tailor our lessons, our experiments, our subject matter to serve students of all abilities. So STEM is a really great place. I think it gets a reputation of being this complex field, and while it certainly can be, it also is a field that can be extremely inclusive. And actually, some of the topics within STEM actually are inherently, like, some of the popular subjects these days are actually making certain things more widespread and more accessible to people of all learning abilities, all backgrounds, all areas of the world. And so STEM can be a really great connector, and within special education, that's a very powerful tool. So so that was my summary of my STEM resource. I hope you all enjoyed and have a wonderful day.